June 6, 1944. The world held its breath. As the first Allied ships carved their way through the storm-tossed English Channel, the greatest invasion in human history was underway. The fate of millions, the very course of World War II, depended on one fragile thing: secrecy. Because if Adolf Hitler had known the truth, that Normandy, not Pas-de-Calais, was the real landing point, D-Day would have been a massacre. But Hitler didn't know, because a man he believed was his most loyal spy had deceived him. His name was Juan Pujol Garcia, codename Garbo, the man who fooled Hitler and saved D-Day. Before he became a ghost in the war's shadows, Juan was just another face in the rubble of a Europe tearing itself apart. Born in Barcelona, Spain, in 1912, a dreamer, idealist, and in every sense, an unlikely spy. He wasn't a soldier, not a politician. He was a man who hated war, but hated fascism even more. When the Spanish Civil War erupted, Juan saw his country descend into madness. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Friends disappeared. By the time it ended, he'd seen enough of hate to last a lifetime. He made a promise to himself. If another dictator ever rose again, he would fight him, but not with bullets, with lies. In 1940, with Nazi Germany swallowing Europe, Juan made a bold decision. He would become a spy for the British. He walked into the British embassy in Madrid and offered his services to help the Allies defeat Hitler. They laughed. A hotel clerk with no training, no military background, and a heavy Spanish accent wanted to be a secret agent? They sent him away. But Juan didn't give up. If the British wouldn't take him, he'd infiltrate the Germans instead. He approached the German embassy pretending to be a fanatical supporter of Hitler. He spun a tale about having contacts all over Britain, informants ready to send him secret military information. The Germans bought it. They trained him, paid him, and gave him a mission: go to England, build a spy network, and report back on Allied activities. But there was one small problem. Juan never set foot in Britain. From a cheap hotel room in Lisbon, armed with nothing but a map, a British railway guide, and imagination, he began to create the greatest web of lies in intelligence history. He invented an entire army of fake agents. He gave them names, families, backgrounds, even personalities. A Welsh nationalist, a Scottish dock worker, a Royal Air Force officer, and dozens more, each completely imaginary. He wrote letters filled with intelligence, troop movements, military gossip, and weather reports, all concocted from public newspapers. His reports were so convincing that the Germans believed he had dozens of men working for him in London. They started sending him money to pay his agents, and Juan, with quiet irony, used that same money to buy better maps, so he could craft even more realistic lies. By 1941, the Abwehr, German military intelligence, regarded Agent Arabel, as they called him, as one of their most valuable spies. They sent his reports directly to Berlin. Even the Gestapo began referencing his information. But Juan knew something was missing. He wasn't doing this for the Germans. He wanted to destroy them from within. He needed the British to believe him. So once again, he tried to contact MI5. This time, his letters were intercepted by Allied intelligence, and unlike before this time, they listened. What they saw stunned them. Here was a man feeding false yet perfectly crafted reports to the Nazis. Every line was plausible, every detail subtly misleading. Britain realized they had stumbled upon something rare, a self-made, self-taught double agent who had already infiltrated Hitler's intelligence network. MI5 brought him to London. They gave him the codename Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, famous for her ability to act and deceive with elegance. London, 1942. The city still smoldered from the Blitz. Garbo arrived with his wife Araceli and a dangerous dream: to turn lies into weapons. MI5 set him up in a small office. No guns, no gadgets, just pens, paper, and a radio. His job? Feed the Germans a steady diet of almost truths, small, believable bits of information that were real enough to build trust. but always misleading enough to protect Allied secrets. He became a master storyteller. He timed his lies with surgical precision. Once he reported that a convoy had left Liverpool heading for Malta, too late for the Germans to stop it. But because his timing seemed authentic, they believed him. Berlin sent him a congratulatory message. "Your reports have been exceptionally valuable. You have saved countless German lives." In reality, he'd saved Allied ships. By 1943, Juan had created a fictional network of 27 agents scattered across Britain. Each one had their own handwriting style, backstory, and code name. He filed fake expense reports, created personal drama between his imaginary spies, even wrote letters from one agent to another. MI5 couldn't believe the scope of his imagination. They said it was like directing a whole cast in a play no one could ever see. But the play was deadly serious. Every false word could save or doom real soldiers. And Hitler's intelligence division was now completely convinced. Agent Garbo was, to them, one of the most trusted men in Europe. As the Allies prepared for the biggest operation of the war, the invasion of France, Garbo's lies became more critical than ever. Operation Overlord, the assault on Normandy, depended on one thing: deception. If the Germans could be tricked into believing the attack would come elsewhere, perhaps at Pas de Calais, then the real invasion force could strike Normandy with the element of surprise. The operation was given a name: Operation Fortitude, and the key to its success was Garbo. In a smoke-filled MI5 room in London, intelligence officers laid out the plan. Fake radio transmissions, inflatable tanks, phantom divisions under the command of General George S. Patton, all part of an elaborate illusion that the Allies would land in Calais. But illusions alone weren't enough. They needed proof. They needed someone the Germans already trusted to tell them that Calais was the real target. That someone was Juan Pujol Garcia. Garbo. For weeks he crafted false reports hinting at troop movements near Dover, coded messages about massive operations forming across the Channel. He spoke of Patton's first U.S. Army group, a completely fake army that existed only in photographs, radio chatter, and Garbo's imagination. The Germans believed every word. They even moved panzer divisions north to defend Calais, exactly as the Allies had hoped. Juan's lies were now steering the course of the war. And yet, behind every message he sent, he could feel the weight of lives hanging in the balance. One mistake, one slip, could expose the entire operation and destroy everything. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, Garbo received the most dangerous order of his life. Berlin demanded immediate confirmation that the invasion had begun. Where, when, and how large. If he said the wrong thing, the deception could collapse. If he said nothing, they might suspect him. As the thunder of Allied bombers shook the English coast, Garbo composed his next message to Hitler's high command. It was the most important lie he would ever tell, and it would decide the fate of D-Day. The radio flickered to life in the dim light of dawn. Outside, thunder rolled, not from storms but from the echo of bombers crossing the Channel. It was finally happening. The invasion had begun. Garbo sat before his encrypted transmitter, hands trembling over the Morse key. Every second counted now. He knew the German command was waiting for him, waiting for confirmation, waiting for guidance from their most trusted source. Him. He began to type. Dots and dashes, each one a lie dressed as truth. Invasion reported. Forces appear to be landing near Normandy. However, indications suggest this is a diversion. Main attack expected at Pas de Calais. The message sped through the ether, reaching Berlin within minutes. And just like that, Juan Pujol Garcia, a former hotel clerk turned master deceiver, had just shaped the most important decision of Hitler's military career. To understand the weight of that message, you need to know this. The German High Command had always believed that the real Allied invasion would come at Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. The beaches of Normandy? Too open, too risky, too far from major ports. Garbo had spent 2 years feeding them reports that reinforced that exact idea. He had woven a tapestry of falsehoods so intricate that even the most skeptical officers believed it. So when D-Day began, when German radar lit up with incoming Allied ships, they hesitated. They thought, this must be the diversion Garbo warned us about. The longer they hesitated, the deeper the Allies pushed into Normandy. Inside a heavily guarded office, British intelligence officers crowded around radios, listening to intercepted German messages. One officer leaned in, whispering, "They're holding the 15th Army at Calais. They're not moving." Another smiled grimly. "It's working." Operation Fortitude, the grand deception, was holding. And at its center was one man's imagination. Garbo's false reports were now backed by a network of fake armies, fake ships, and fake airfields. General Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. Inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and sound recordings of marching troops echoing through empty fields. From above, German reconnaissance pilots saw what they thought were invasion preparations near Dover. They photographed the tanks. They listened to the radio chatter. They sent the images to Berlin, and every single piece of fake evidence reinforced one conclusion. The real invasion would come later, at Calais. But Garbo's mission was more dangerous than anyone knew. Because his messages weren't just creative writing, they were acts of war. He had to maintain perfect consistency, never contradicting earlier reports. He had to match every coded message with events that appeared authentic. MI5 monitored every line he sent, sometimes editing his wording, sometimes timing his transmissions to align with Allied movements. But once a message left his transmitter, it was out of their hands. If Berlin doubted even one line, it could unravel the entire web. On the evening of June 6th, Garbo received another urgent request from his German handler. "Report at once. Confirm invasion size and location. Is this the main attack, or a feint?" Garbo stared at the coded text, heart pounding. He couldn't tell them the truth, that this was it, the real invasion. But he couldn't stay silent either. Too much silence might raise suspicion. He crafted his response carefully, every word dripping with false authority. "The landings at Normandy appear extensive but lack key divisions. My agents confirm this is only a preliminary strike to divert defenses from Calais. Main force expected to follow within days." The message was sent. Hours later, Berlin ordered, "Hold 15th Army in Calais. Wait for main attack." That single command, born from Garbo's deception, ensured that Hitler kept his best divisions idle for over a week. By the time he realized the truth, the Allies had already secured Normandy's beaches and begun their push inland. It's hard to overstate what that meant. The difference between victory and disaster at D-Day came down to time. Every hour, the German reinforcements stayed put in Calais. Thousands of Allied soldiers gained ground in Normandy. And that time was bought not by generals or tanks, but by a man tapping Morse code in a dark London room. Garbo had fooled the most feared dictator in history. Reports poured into Hitler's bunker. Normandy was in chaos. Allied troops advancing, bridges seized, airfields taken. Still, Hitler refused to move his forces. He slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "The invasion in Normandy is a diversion. Garbo says the real attack is yet to come." Generals exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared question him. For Hitler, Agent Garbo's word had become gospel. He had mentioned Garbo by name in meetings. He even awarded him the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors, given to a man secretly working for their enemies. As the days passed, Garbo continued feeding lies. He reported that the Allies were regrouping for a second, larger assault at Calais. Even when it was clear that Normandy was expanding, he insisted the Calais attack was imminent. For 2 whole weeks, the Germans kept nearly 2 panzer divisions stationed away from Normandy, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Historians would later say that those 2 weeks decided the war in Western Europe. Without them, the Allied beachheads might have been crushed. But Garbo's words, his lies, had chained Hitler's army in place. Yet behind the quiet triumph was a man unraveling under the weight of his own deception. Juan barely slept. He knew that every coded message he sent led to men dying, some on beaches, some on battlefields. He had saved many lives, but cost others. The burden of his secret war was crushing. Sometimes late at night his wife Araceli would find him sitting by the window, staring into the fog. She would whisper, "Juan, it's over now." But he would shake his head. "No, not yet." For spies, wars don't end with peace treaties. They end with silence. When D-Day was declared a success, Garbo was quietly commended by MI5. There were no medals, no public ceremonies. His existence was still top secret. The Germans, on the other hand, were ecstatic. They had no idea he'd betrayed them. They sent him a message congratulating him on his remarkable service to the Reich. Then, they did the unthinkable. They nominated him for a medal. The Iron Cross, personally approved by Hitler himself. Juan accepted it, not out of pride, but out of poetic justice. He had tricked the devil into rewarding his own downfall. By late 1944, the tide of war had turned. The Allies were advancing through France. Berlin's days were numbered, but Garbo couldn't celebrate. He was a man divided, a ghost caught between two worlds, living a lie so deep that even victory felt hollow. He had done the impossible. He had fooled Hitler, saved D-Day, and possibly shortened the war by months. But now, he was a spy with no purpose, no peace, and no identity. His work was done, and that terrified him. As the Allies liberated Paris and the world rejoiced, Garbo slipped quietly into obscurity. There would be no fame, no recognition, no glory. MI5 had one final instruction for him: disappear. For his own safety, the Germans could never learn the truth. So the man who fooled Hitler vanished into the fog of history. Rumors would later say he died in Africa from a fever. But the truth was far stranger. Because Garbo didn't die, he simply erased himself. The guns fell silent. In London, church bells rang for the first time in 6 long years. The war was over. The Allies had won. But for Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, victory brought no joy. He watched the crowds cheering in Trafalgar Square, strangers embracing, flags waving in the wind. And yet in his chest there was only emptiness. He had lived for years in the shadows, speaking through lies and codes, shaping the fate of nations with invisible ink. Now, with peace, came something he had not felt in a long time: fear. Because the war might have ended, but his enemies were still out there. To the Germans, Garbo was still one of their most trusted agents, a man who had served the Reich faithfully. If they discovered the truth, that he had been the greatest double agent in history, there would be no mercy. The Nazi war machine was collapsing, but its survivors carried long memories. MI5 knew it too. So they gave Garbo one final mission: disappear. In 1948, news spread through the intelligence world that Juan Pujol Garcia was dead. Officially, he had died of malaria in Angola. His death certificate was signed. His grave was marked. The file was closed. But none of it was true. With the help of British intelligence, Garbo slipped quietly across the Atlantic under a new identity. His wife, Araceli, returned to Spain with their children, believing he truly was gone. Even she wasn't told the full truth. Garbo resurfaced in Venezuela, alone, anonymous, and invisible. The man who fooled Hitler had become a ghost. In Caracas, he lived a simple, quiet life. He opened a small bookstore. He grew a beard. No one knew who he was. He never spoke of the war. Sometimes, late at night, he would listen to the radio and hear documentaries about the Second World War. Battles, generals, the Normandy landings. He would sit silently, eyes distant as the announcer praised the heroes of D-Day. They never mentioned him. And he preferred it that way. He had spent years pretending to be someone he wasn't. Now he had finally become nothing at all. For nearly 40 years, Garbo's story remained buried in classified files. Too secret, too dangerous to tell. Historians spoke of a mysterious double agent who misled Hitler, but few knew his name. Then, in 1984, a British historian named Nigel West began digging into declassified MI5 records. He found fragments of reports, code names, radio logs, all pointing to a spy known only as Agent Garbo. The trail led him to one shocking discovery. There was no record of Garbo's death in Angola. Intrigued, West followed the clues, and eventually to a small, sun-drenched bookstore in Venezuela. He found him. Juan Pujol Garcia was in his 70s. His hair was white, his face worn by time, but his eyes, the same calculating, curious eyes that once fooled the Führer himself, still carried that quiet spark. When West introduced himself, Garbo smiled softly. "I didn't think anyone would ever find me," he said. For the first time in decades, he told his story, not as a spy, but as a man. He spoke of the years of loneliness, of lies told not for greed or glory, but for something greater. He had deceived the enemy not for personal gain, but for peace, to stop a dictator who had brought the world to its knees. In 1984, 40 years after D-Day, Garbo returned to Europe for the first time since the war. The British government quietly invited him to attend the 40th anniversary commemoration of the Normandy landings. He stood on the cliffs overlooking Omaha Beach, the wind carrying the sound of waves against the rocks. Before him lay rows of white crosses, the graves of men who had died on that morning of June 6, 1944. He removed his hat, lowered his head, and whispered, "They were the true heroes." No one around him knew who he was. No cameras turned his way. But in that silent moment he knew the truth. Without his lies, these men might never have reached these shores. After that day, Garbo returned to Venezuela, content to remain a shadow once more. He died quietly in 1988, at the age of 76. When word spread of his passing, tributes poured in from historians and intelligence officers across the world. MI5 released his file, revealing the truth of Operation Fortitude, and the astonishing role he had played in the success of D-Day. For the first time, the public learned how one man's imagination and courage had saved millions. Today, Garbo's name is etched quietly in the halls of espionage history, a man who turned deception into an art form. The British honored him with the MBE, member of the Order of the British Empire. The Germans unknowingly had already honored him with the Iron Cross. He remains the only person in history to receive medals from both sides of World War II. But Garbo's true legacy lies beyond the medals. It lies in what he proved. That even in the darkest of times, one mind, armed not with weapons but with will and wit, can alter the fate of nations. They called him the spy who fooled Hitler. But perhaps that title misses the point, because Juan Pujol Garcia was more than a trickster. He was a man who believed that lies, when used for truth, could save the world. When he died, he left behind no monuments, no memoirs, only silence. But every June 6th, when the world remembers D-Day, his ghost walks again among the waves and the white crosses of Normandy, not as a hero seeking glory, but as a quiet reminder that courage sometimes wears the face of deception. In war, he once said, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. That bodyguard was Garbo.